We're going to take a turn now as we move into the message, and it's not as joyous immediately, but it is still couched in good news. But this sermon that I've titled Legion this week, and if you don't know why, you'll know why soon enough, but it really deals with something that we so often wish wasn't the reality that exists among us, and yet it does. It's something that at times we can even choose to ignore, and, fingers in the ears and eyes closed and going, la, 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 I don't see you, I don't hear you, I don't want to believe it's there. But Mark, in the telling of his gospel narrative, reminds us routinely it is present among us, and what is present is evil. That there are evil forces that are at work, and their effect is palpable. Now, again, as we're walking through Mark over these series of weeks, what we're also aware of in a moment like this is that there is good news in the midst of the awareness of evil. And the good news is that Jesus is on the case, that there is a power by which evil trembles. There is a way in which not only we individually, but we as a world can be saved from the evil that seeks to torment and destroy anyone or anything that it comes in the path of. I also think it's helpful to be aware that as evil is constantly sort of lurking to do its thing, that it's not only looking to torment and bring pain to us, but even better for evil in its objectives is to bring pain and torment through us, so that it's not only us who are hurting as a result of evil and the ways of evil, but it's that we would become perhaps unknowing accomplices in the work that evil is trying to do in the world. But Jesus invites us to a different way and invites this world into a redemption that no longer is being inflicted by evil or used by it, but instead is working against it. So I'm going to walk through this next quite vivid story, and I'm going to do it sort of a couple verses at a time and offer some thoughts, and we will see, as always, where the Spirit takes us from there. But we start in chapter 5, verse 1. It begins this way. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. So the they that came to the other side of the sea is Jesus and his disciples. And if you were with us 2 weeks ago, you might recall that this is immediately following that story of the disciples and Jesus crossing the sea and being caught in a terrible storm. The disciples are afraid for their lives. Jesus says, shh. And the waves stop and the sea doesn't overtake the boats fully. Well, they make it through that perilous night, and as they reach the shore on the other side of the sea, they come to this country labeled here as being of the Gerasenes. And you don't have, there's a bunch kind of historically around this, but you don't have to know all of that. But what you should know is that it's, as Jesus and the disciples cross the sea, they move out of home territory into fringe territory. We're still sort of in the Israelite country or kingdom, but it's much more on the fringes and literally on the other side of the tracks, where it's really a mixture of all sorts of Jewish and Gentile, not only people, but practices and way of being. The imagery here is that Jesus is taking the good news beyond the boundaries. That from very early on, Jesus is declaring that this good news of God is for all people, not just those who are in this particular geographic location. So, verse 2. When he had stepped out of the boat, when Jesus stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. So I'm going to pause there for a second. This man immediately meets Jesus here in Gerasene. And if you're familiar with this story, you've heard this person referred to as the Gerasene demoniac, which is that's not a title that's super awesome for somebody. It's scary sounding, right? And so this man meets him, and it will tell us in a few verses that how he met Jesus was that he was in the tombs, and from a long way off, he could see to the shore, and he went running out to Jesus. And there's a couple of possibilities in that moment of what's going to happen. Some of them are good possibilities, right? But we have this idea of seeing somebody from a distance maybe that we haven't seen in a long time, or some honored guest, and you can't wait to get to that person. The story of the prodigal son and the father is like this, right? The father is searching, and from a distance he sees his son, and he goes running out to his son. And so maybe this running out to Jesus from this man it's got some kind of love behind it. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to see you. However, there are other instances where somebody sees somebody from a distance and says, I can't believe that dirty, rotten scoundrel dared to show his face around here. And the running to the person is one of, we're about to tangle. Well, I'm going to leave you in suspense because we're going to find out in a few seconds what the motive is behind the person that is running out to Jesus. But first, Mark gives us a little bit of backstory on this man from Gerasene living in the tombs. It says he lived among the tombs, verse 3, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain, for he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. And I'm going to pause there because then we get to the part again where he sees Jesus. But there's the backstory, this wild man. How interesting that the language is all about the ways in which not all the language, but so much of it is how the people have tried to constrain him, and yet nothing can constrain him. Nothing. He's going to be free of all the chains, and yet what we read about is somebody who is completely captive to the spirits that are at work within him. We get this image of a filthy man. This story is told in two of the other Gospels, and in one of them, I believe it's Luke, they also mention that he's nude. And so can you picture this guy first? Don't picture him too closely. It's Sunday morning, but it's, from a distance with a little bit of blur. Can you picture this nude, wild man, hair crazy, eyes wide, shackles, like the bracelets and remnants of chains still on his arms and his feet, howling at the moon? I mean, this is some kind of sight. There's a verse in here where it says, and I want to read you the exact words here. It says, in the NRSV, no one had the strength to subdue him. And other translations for that word subdue, they'll say control. But whether it be subdue or control, they both fall a little bit short of the core meaning of the word that's used there. And the word is actually tame. And here's why that's significant. Throughout the Bible, that word tame is used a number of times, and it is never used in regard to human beings. Yeah, and this makes sense, like a lion tamer, right? Yeah, it's, this is what Dan Patrick used to say about Michael Jordan. You can't stop him, you can only hope to contain him. You can only hope, you can't contain the beast, but maybe there's some way that you could just keep it in check a little bit. But this idea of taming, this is what in Genesis God invited humanity to do with the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. I give you dominion over all of it, that you would tame it, that you would subdue it. But here for this man, it's interesting that he is described in this verb that doesn't deal with human beings, but deals with animals. And in part, or maybe in major, that's because that's how this person is viewed. He's viewed like a wild, feral creature. So what that creates, if we've done the image in our mind of a dirty man, a nude, hair crazy, he's got bruises all over his body from hitting himself with a rock, probably some cuts too. He's howling at the moon day and night. He's just sort of roaming around. It immediately can put us in the role of like observers at a zoo. And we're behind the glass and we're looking with curiosity, but we're very much separated from this person who's not a person. He's nothing like me. I mean, I might be a mess at times. I know I woke up with bedhead this morning and, I got angry as I drove here and somebody cut me off, but I'm nothing like this guy. So I'm going to watch and I'm going to see how it is Jesus interacts with him. But I think the truth is that we might find, whether it be ourselves personally, intimately tied, or or maybe just our look at the world at large, we might see that there's more in common with us and he than we would like to immediately admit. So we know that this man is under attack from evil. It'll describe in just a few verses how severe this attack is as it's imaged in the way of demons possessing him. But it's vast. And he is being tormented and tortured by this evil. And there's three ways in particular that I think we can draw out of that real quickly. And the first I've already mentioned about this word being used of him that is only used with creatures, with animals. There's this image and view of this man that he's not a man anymore, he's not a human. And yet, we know biblically, we know from one of the core tenets of United Methodist belief, for several hundred years, this is one of our bedrock beliefs, that in Genesis it meant business when it said, then God created humankind in God's image, male and female alike. All of them, all people are divine image bearers. There's this Latin phrase, imago Dei, image of God, that we believe people, including this man, has been made in the image of. And still, others view him, and he may very well view himself as having that identity stripped from him. This is no longer a human. He's certainly not the image of God. He's something entirely other. Here's the second thing that evil is attacking with this person. It's that other people don't want anything to do with him. He's a menace at worst. He's a nuisance at best. He's the kind of lurking figure that scares our children, and he's the kind of person we're constantly worried about. Is he going to try and take something that doesn't belong to him and is mine? And so he's kept to this place the best he can be, confined to the place of the dead, to the tombs. And they've even tried to chain him and to restrain him that way, to keep him at a distance. The punishment that evil is exacting on this man in a second regard, first was identity, the second is community. There's nobody for him. He's on his own, he's isolated, he's not wanted. And the third thing is that of evil inflicting on this man a path towards self-harm. Of course, visually we see that with the hitting of himself with these rocks. But we see it in any other number of ways too. We see this wandering without purpose. We see that there doesn't seem to be anything to be done with his life. He may have thought from time to time that death would be a welcome relief from the agony that he was living in day by day. That's the work of evil, my friends. That's not the work of God. That's not the reality of this human being. That his life is worth more and it is better being dead than it is alive. That's not only the voice of evil, but that's the work of the evil one in the lives of people in this world. This is a lot of heavy stuff. I've got to smooth it out a little bit. So there's a singer-songwriter named Jewel. She sings with an acoustic guitar, and she had this line that she said in a song about heartbreak that I thought might bring this person's sort of situation to a personal place with us. Because the reality is we can be in this place through any number of dynamics and circumstances in the world, any number of ways that evil is assaulting and hurting us. Jewel's line is this. She says at one point, I'm half alive, but I feel mostly dead. Who hasn't felt that way before? I'm half alive. I don't feel fully alive, but I know my heart's still beating. I know I woke up this morning, so at least I'm half alive. But if you could really look inside me, you would see that I feel like I'm mostly dead. Our man from Gerasene is alive, but he lives as somebody who's mostly dead. He's the walking dead. And again, I think there's more connection with him than we like to acknowledge at times, whether it be for us or people whom we have loved who find themselves in this same place. So let's get to the encounter with Jesus, verse 6. When this man with the demon saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and he bowed down before him. There's the answer. We wondered if it was going to be a hug or a punch, and it turned out the man bowed down before him. Verse 7, he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" And that phrase there, "what have you to do with me?" Another way to understand that would be, what do we have in common? And even another way to understand that might be, what are you doing here? In the same place where I am, you are. That doesn't make sense. And then he calls him by his name. He says, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, I beg you by God, do not torment me." Which there's its own irony in that, right? This is the voice not of the man being tormented, but the voice of the tormenting spirit within him, recognizing Jesus. Boy, the demons always see Jesus quicker than the people do in the Gospels. Is there any lesson for us this morning just in that? Maybe you forget all the other gobbledygook I've said, but you'll say, boy, it is interesting that the demons recognize Jesus, but people are slow on the uptake. I wonder if I've been slow on the uptake. You know, there's this story that is right before this one. 2 weeks ago, we went through it on the boat. And here's how this connects. The boat, the storm, the disciples, they're scared. And Jesus seems to get angry at their fear. But Jesus isn't angry that they're afraid of the sea and the waves. What's he angry about? He's angry that they don't recognize him. When they wake Jesus up in that boat, they don't bow before him. They don't say, "Son of the Most High, save us, have mercy on us." They say, "Don't you care about us?" The demon doesn't say that, because the demon knows that this Jesus, Son of God, is the ultimate one who cares. And Jesus, when he's frustrated, it's not that his disciples are scared. Human beings get scared. It's that they don't see him for who he is, that they question, "Are you just going to let us die?" And Jesus is like, "Of course I'm not going to just let you die. I'm with you." But the demons recognize, and even as they recognize here with Jesus, did you catch this? The man bowed down, the spirits speak through him, and then the spirit starts negotiating. And isn't this one of the ways of evil, right? The art of the deal. "Okay, Jesus, I know you're Lord. I know this doesn't look really great for me. But can we make a deal? Have mercy on me. Don't torment me. Sure, I've been tormenting this guy to no end, but don't torment me." The bargaining, even in the midst of believing, this touches on that verse where Jesus says something about believing, and that's good, but even the demons believe. So how are you going to do better, people, than the demons do? So let's go to verse 9. Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And remember, Jesus is not asking the man. He is now speaking to these evil spirits that are within the man. And the reply is, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And I'm just going to take a wild stab in the dark here, that when that response came out of that person, that it didn't sound like I just said it. My name is Legion, for we are many. Maybe this is being a product of watching more kind of scary movies than I should have. But I hear something like, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And lightning bolts. I bet it was scary. I bet it was something clearly not of this world. But why did Jesus ask this name? Why did Jesus say, "All right, you know who I am. You know that I'm Jesus, Son of the Most High. You know that I have the power to do whatever I want with you. You know me, but who are you?" Now, some of this is couched in the ancient sort of demonology understanding that if a person did have some kind of a demon in them, that if they could know the name of that demon, then they had power over them. They had the ability to sort of upend them. And some of that sounds like, dark arts, hokey pokey, exorcist kind of stuff. But there's a real live connection to this. And one of my very favorite teachings from Mr. Rogers. Did you know that Mr. Rogers was an exorcist? I didn't really either until I read this. But I said, oh my gosh, it makes sense. exorcising demons in children and parents since 1958. Mr. Rogers says this, are you afraid? Are you sad? Are you mad? Well, then say what you are afraid of. Say what you're sad about. Name what you are angry about, because if you can mention it, then you can manage it. That's good. The way we understand demons today may be very different than 2,000 years ago, but the dynamics are the same. What is your name? What is it that I'm supposed to be afraid of? What is it that I'm supposed to be sad about, that I'm supposed to be angry about? If you can mention it, if you can talk about it, then you can manage it. Let's move to verse 11. I told myself I'm only preaching 20 minutes this morning because we got communion. I'm only a third of the way through my sermon. Should we go to noon today? These are too hard of a laugh up here. They're like, good one, Pastor. No. What's Pam's number again? Can we get her back? All right, I'm gonna cut this short because communion is not only a good way for us to close our time together today, it's a vital way for us to do that. So this is what happens. The demons beg for mercy. And isn't this interesting as they say, Son of God, don't torment us, that Jesus actually has mercy on them. Verse 11, now on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, send us into the swine, let us enter them. And so he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out, and they entered the swine and the herd, numbering about 2,000. They rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. For the original Jewish hearers of this gospel story, when they hear about unclean spirits being cast by Jesus into unclean animals, pigs are the model unclean creature in Jewish tradition. When they hear about these spirits going into those creatures, they would have thought, yeah, that's right. That's where they should go. That's their home. But then these spirits take charge of these pigs and immediately the herd points in one direction, starts running, and I forget the name of those creatures. Was this in the 70s? There was a video. They run to the cliff and they just fall over. Lemmings. That was it. Which I think I then saw something that was a Mythbuster about that story. But anyway, it makes for a good image. But this is what the pigs did. They ran to the cliff and then they just jumped right over. And we think, well, a fitting end. And of course, there's more to the story that I'm not going to be reading this morning, but the fitting end has a little bit more fitness to it than just simply seeing these unclean creatures run over the cliff and end their life. They run over the cliff into where? The sea. The same sea that Jesus and the disciples were crossing the night before. What happened on that sea? A great storm arose, and Jesus used language of exorcism to rebuke the storm. The storm trying to stop Jesus and the disciples from going to the other side to bring good news. It was like the inverse of Jonah. The storm was to get Jonah back on course. This storm was to stop Jesus' course. But Jesus kept going anyway. And so these pigs go into that same place. Here's another interesting thing about the ancient Jewish pool of images. Of course, not just Judaism, but so many since and still to this day understand the sky as the residing place of all that is good in the divine. But where the evil spirits live, the supernatural, maybe, it's morphed into caves and underground dwellings, but for the ancient Jewish mind, it was the sea. Dark, chaotic, mysterious, full of all sorts of danger. Those demons went back home. Jesus says, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And they said, no, we'll go home. That'll be fine. Here's why this is significant and why I want to close on this. is that this is the exact perfect counterpoint to Jesus' invitation for those original disciples and for me and you to follow him. Jesus never said, follow me, and here's how to do it. Say a prayer, get your theological furniture in order, have it be like a mental assent. Say, I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus, and I'm good. Jesus says, follow me. Do as I do. And to those original disciples, he said to many of them, drop your nets, stop fishing for fish, and do what? Fish for people. What an image, right? These pigs with these unclean spirits plunge into the sea, the dwelling place of evil, and the disciples and Jesus are doing what? Pulling people out of the chaos, out of the despair, out of the abuse, out of the pain, saying, you don't have to live in that anymore. Come out of the evil and into the family of God. All are invited. All have an identity as being sacred in the image of God, made in that image. You don't have to be isolated from community. You don't have to harm yourself. You don't have to be viewed as something less than. You can be viewed in the fullness of all that God has for you. We fish for people, drawing them out of the darkness and into the light. The light of love. The light of love that when the demons see it, they recognize it and go, whew, have mercy. Boy, I wonder if we as the church could do the same. That in the light of the love of Jesus, we say, yes, we follow you. Yes, we cast out evil in your name and we draw others into your goodness, into your restoration, into your wholeness. You know, the rest of this story, boy, I told you I wasn't going to preach long, and it's preach long. This is the rest of the story is that this man who had been possessed by the legion of demons, he's healed. And he ends up being this dynamic evangelist in a Gentile sort of infused world. Everybody knew who he was. He's the wild naked guy running around crazy, howling at the moon. And now he's somebody else. And he tells them who he is and why he is. Well, I'm not the wild beast you thought I was. I'm me. And the reason I'm me is because of the good news of Jesus Christ. And that good news isn't just for me, but you can too. And we may think, well, I don't need quite as much help as you, buddy. But maybe we do. And maybe it's not just us. Maybe it's our kids and our grandkids. Maybe it's people in this community, broader Vero Beach, Indian River County. Maybe it's folks all around the world who are isolated from community, who wonder if they're living half alive but mostly dead. People who do not believe, they're not affirmed that they're made in the image of God. Maybe we're closer to this man than we thought we were. Maybe we can see Jesus the way that those spirits within him saw Jesus as well. And maybe we can be part of the work God is doing to heal and restore, not only in us, but through us. For this man called the Gerasene demoniac to become the first evangelist in the Gentile world, telling people, Jesus saves. Turn your eyes to him. He's hope for the hopeless. He's peace for the restless. He's here for the bruised, the battered, the lost, the damned. He wants to make a difference. He wants to make it in you and through you. May we see with those eyes. May we experience with that sort of love. Let's pray together. Lord God, we need you. Oh, how we need you. Our friends, our family, this world needs you. Lord, we are yours and you are ours. What a gift. For those who don't know that, the pain can be overwhelming for them and for us to know that they feel that way, that they're living that way. So, Lord, may we be beacons of your light and hope in the world. May we share your good news for the sake of others, and in that may we find redemption and fullness in our own lives. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.